friends, it's Rachel. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to another monthly reading wrap-up where I share with you the books I've read this month. It's hard to believe that I have now come full circle and I have done a year's worth of these wrap-ups. I started doing them last September. Unfortunately, this September was not a very good reading month for me. I only got 4 books read. There were a few that I DNF'd, and obviously that put me behind. I'm not really going to talk about why I DNF'd these books because there's really no point, but in case you're curious, they were Children of Earth and Sky by Guy Gabriel Kay and Mercury Pictures Presents by Anthony Mara, I believe. These were both books that I was fairly excited for, but they just didn't deliver. The first book that I did finish this month was Furysong by Rosaria Munda. This is the third and final book in a trilogy that I had been following since the very first book came out, and I was very excited to see how she chose to wrap this all up. Basically, this book follows 2 main characters, Lee and Annie. Lee is the son of basically the caste of people who were in charge in this system of government. He's a Dragon Lord's son. The Dragon Lords were overthrown 10 years ago by the revolution, and Lee now is a soldier and a person of some import in the new regime that was established by the resistance. And the same goes for Annie, except that Annie was lowborn, and she basically rose through the ranks because the regime that was established by the revolutionaries allows anybody to have a fair chance at rising through the ranks, whereas before only basically noble-born people could do so. In this particular book, the Dragon Lords who were outlawed after they were overthrown have come back, and they have launched a counter-coup, and they have taken over Callipolis again. So they're in charge again, and the revolutionary members, the people who had positions within the old regime, now find themselves on the outs, and they have to pick sides and find a way to survive and possibly fight back as well. The reason that this series interested me so much is because there are dragons involved. This is a dragon rider type story. The dragons are not sentient beings, they do not speak, but they have bonds with the riders that ride them. Personally, I'm more of a fan of sentient animals, but I did enjoy this book very much, especially given the fact that it's YA. I thought it did a very good job at making the characters relatable and likable, and it's just full of a lot of things that I love. It's a fantasy, it has dragons, it has revolution, it has like, not quite evil empires, but close enough. Evil regimes that are overthrown by said revolutions, and then they're not yet dead, so they come back, and then you have political intrigue. You have a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot at stake here, and so naturally I was very excited by this book and eager to see how everything gets wrapped up, because I really couldn't necessarily see a happy ending. I think when you have political intrigue and revolutions and regimes being overthrown, it can be hard to figure out how does this ever end. Unfortunately, because it was so long in between each book release, I don't really remember a great deal of what happened in book 2. I actually read book 2 before I started my AuthorTube channel, and so I don't have a video about that. I think book 1 came out in 2019, and then it was a 2-year gap between book 1 and book 2. Book 2 came out in March of last year, and book 3 just came out this August. So there was more than a year's gap even between book 2 and book 3. Unfortunately, I don't remember as much as I would like from one book to the next. I probably should go back and reread them, but there's just only so much time and so many books to get to. I just did not do that. Luckily, it wasn't such a big deal, but I do think I probably would have benefited from another reread. I think the biggest issue is when I first began reading, I'm the most lost then, but the more I get into the story and it unfolds, it gets better and I'm not so lost. It did feel like the pace of this book bogged down a bit in the middle. Usually things are very quick and fast-paced, but the middle did feel a little bit slowed. But the thing that really kept me from loving this book was the romance part. Annie and Lee have a romance together. The will they, won't they, or rather will they be able to or won't they be able to, has kind of gone back and forth from one book to the next. It got a little bit tiring to watch Annie flip-flop between her not wanting to do her duty and thinking it's very unfair that she can't have happiness because, well, why can't I when everybody else can, to flipping back to I have a duty to perform. Happiness is not something that is allowed. And that was very kind of tiring to read, her flip-flopping back and forth between the two of them when I really just wanted her to settle on one or the other. But she also flip-flopped between the two very rapidly. It felt a bit like whiplash. I didn't really like it when Annie became basically lovesick over Lee and that's all she cared about, and she didn't really care about her duty, because I think that's unrealistic, that you could just completely forget about the duties that you have to perform and basically the strife that is going on outside. It's completely normal to not want to be a part of it, to not want to have to deal with it, but to abandon your responsibility completely is a little unrealistic, I thought. Obviously, she snaps out of it but I didn't really like the agonizing over the romance. Another thing that has always been an issue with the trilogy from the very beginning is that you kind of have to suspend disbelief over the fact that the government is run by teenagers. Obviously, the most important positions are held by adults, but the vast majority of positions below those are held by these teenage characters. And obviously that really wouldn't work very well in real life. Sometimes it's easy to forget that the characters are in fact teenagers, and it seems somewhat plausible. And then something happens where they act immature again, and you're just like, okay. But all in all, I was a little bit disappointed by the ending of this book. It didn't feel very realistic. It felt like it all wrapped up very quickly and a little too conveniently. Another thing that I wasn't quite sure about was the end decisions that various characters make for themselves and their future. My reaction to this was a bit mixed, especially given everything else that we had gone through the rest of the book, but I think it was the ending overall that didn't sit as well with me because it just felt too clean and too convenient. But this goes back to what I said at the beginning. How do you wrap this up? How does it have a happy ending? And it's a very difficult thing to do. All in all, I'm very glad that I read this series, and I do recommend it. It is far beyond most YA that is out there, I think, these days in terms of quality, and I'm not disappointed for having read it. I don't necessarily know that I'd read it again just because it is a bit on the heavy side. It's a very dark book for YA, which is another thing I appreciate. It didn't pull any punches in terms of violence. It showed a revolution as it really would be. So props to the book for that. Next we have The Secret of Bow Lane by Jennifer Ashley. This is the latest book in a Victorian mystery series that I have followed from the very beginning. It follows a cook named Kat who works in a wealthy Mayfair household, and through a series of events she finds herself wrapped up in various mysteries along with her friends. She is friends with Lady Cynthia, who is the niece of the household owner. She likes to dress in men's clothing because she doesn't like the gowns of the era, and she helps Kat with various mysteries, as well as Daniel McAdam, who is the main love interest. He is an interesting figure that Kat knows he can basically blend in wherever he's needed, and he helps her out as well. There's various other characters that help, and you get to know them better as the series goes on. To describe what this latest book is about, I have to back up a little bit. Kat believed herself to be married to a man named Joe Bristow that she met years ago, and they had a daughter together, and he was a sailor and he went to sea and then he died and never came back. And so then Kat was left to raise her daughter by herself, which she then has to keep a secret because if her employer found out that she had a daughter out of wedlock, then she'd be thrown out of her position. And the reason that the daughter is illegitimate is because she and Joe were not ever actually married. Joe had secretly married another woman before he married Kat, and he just told her that they were married, and she believed him because he was going to trick her. He knew that if she didn't believe that they were actually married, then she would never stay with him. But he had already married another woman in secret. In this latest book, that woman comes to Kat and says that she believes that Joe was murdered and not that he just perished at sea, and that he had a fortune that he amassed, and if Kat can help her find it, she will share the money with Kat, which obviously will better her circumstances greatly and allow her to provide for her daughter. So that was the basis of this mystery. I didn't think it was a particularly deep mystery. I thought it focused more on the characters' personal lives and the mystery itself, more so than some of the other mysteries before it. I don't know how realistic the mystery really was, but there really actually wasn't that much to it. Mostly this book focused on the characters' romantic lives. I thought that there was a little too much romance in this book for my personal taste. It's certainly not the worst thing in the world, especially given another book that I'm going to mention in this list for this month. It's certainly not the worst. It's certainly not the worst romance ever, but I wanted a mystery and instead I got part of a mystery and mostly romance. But I will keep reading this series. It's not my favorite mystery series. I think the characters are just a little bit flat and the series is just overall okay. To be honest, I'm not sure exactly why I keep continuing with it, except that it's a Victorian mystery, which is something that I love, and it's hard to find good Victorian mysteries or good historical mysteries in general, and so if I can find one that fits what I want without being terrible, then I guess I'm going to read it. But if you're looking for kind of a cozy Victorian mystery series, I would definitely recommend giving this one a try. Next on the list, we have The Screaming Staircase by Jonathan Stroud, which is the only book that I have to hold up in this video because the rest of them I got from the library and I no longer have them. This is, of course, a reread for me. If you're at all familiar with my channel, you know how much I love this series. This is the first book in the series, and I hope to be able to reread the rest of them for October for spooky season, but I don't know if I'll be able to. I have have a whole video dedicated to this series in which I just gush over it and tell you how wonderful it is. This series follows ghost hunters in London, is the simplest way I can put it. Ghosts have infested London, so much so that it's called the Problem now, and the only people who can see ghosts are young people. Adults can't see them. And these ghosts, there's various different types of them, and they're obviously dangerous. If you get ghost touched, you will die. So various agencies have popped up across London which are hired to go to various places and get rid of the ghosts. One of those agencies is Lockwood & Co. It's run by Anthony Lockwood and George Cubbins, and the main character, Lucy Carlyle, comes to work for them in the first book. They are all young people, there are no adults involved, and together they go on various adventures. In this first book, The Screaming Staircase, they are forced to investigate a very dangerous haunting because something goes horribly wrong during one of their cases. And if they can manage to weed out this very dangerous haunting, all of their problems will be solved, but that's providing that they can stay alive first. I'm not going to take up too much time talking about this book, but I love it to pieces. This is probably like the 12th time that I've reread this book. I read it a lot, it's kind of insane, but it's just perfect. I love this series to absolute pieces. This is the perfectly plotted book. It does exist. Every time I read it, I'm just completely blown away by how perfectly plotted this book is. The characters are all phenomenal, they're well fleshed out, they're likable, they feel very much like real people, and what I love is that even though they're young people, and this would technically be like a YA book, they feel more mature than a lot of YA characters do, while also not being unrealistic. The dialogue is witty, the world building is phenomenal, it's very much like ours, but so creepily different, and I just absolutely love this series to pieces. If I could recommend only one series to someone, I would recommend this one. I encourage everybody to pick it up and read it, and I do not think you will be disappointed. Returning to what I said earlier about romance, that brings us to the last book on this list, which is Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. I read this book as part of my Hype or Hate series, where I read a best-selling book to try to see if I can understand the hype surrounding it and why it is in fact a bestseller. This book is obviously a romance. The main character is named Kenna. She has just recently been released from jail because several years ago she accidentally killed her then boyfriend Scotty in a drunk driving accident, and she was sent to jail for that, and she also lost custody of the daughter that they had together. Her parental rights were terminated, and her daughter DM is now being raised by Patrick and Grace, who are Scotty's parents. They blame Kenna for their son's death and do not want anything whatsoever to do with her. They do not want her to be a part of their lives, and they certainly do not want her to meet their daughter. Scotty's best friend was named Ledger. Ledger owns a bar in this book, and he is very much a part of DM's life. He loves DM because that was his best friend's daughter, and he also views Patrick and Grace as like parental figures for himself, so he's very much involved in their life. He and Kenna meet at the beginning of the book, and through a series of events they form a deeper relationship, which then creates conflict because if Ledger chooses his relationship with Kenna, he will lose his relationship with DM, Patrick, and Grace, but if he chooses them over Kenna, then their relationship will be at an end. So he has to choose, and it leads to all sorts of conflict. I have a video dedicated solely to this book, obviously. It just came out recently, if you'd like to check that out, where I talk about this book in detail. But suffice to say, for this video, this book basically felt like two different books entirely. The romance part is sappy and a little bit insipid. There are some pretty questionable quotes in this book, which I read from in the other video. I think that the part about the romance is really shallow, and I didn't enjoy that, although I did think that the quotes were very funny. The other part of the book deals with heavy topics like trauma, grief, forgiveness, and Kenna's desire to be reunited with her daughter, whom she's being kept away from. I think what this book was trying to do was be a romance that's deeper than the average romance, but I think it failed, because I can't forget the parts in the other part of the book that are dumb. Some of these quotes are just absolutely questionable. They're hilarious because I can't believe that they were actually written, but I can't forget those even when I'm reading this part of the book that tries to be deep and tries to handle these heavy topics. I don't think that they're handled in any particularly deep way. I think that they were basically glossed over at the end, but it's not the worst book that I've ever read, certainly. I usually don't like romance for that reason. I like it to be a bit deeper than that. I do think Colleen Hoover deserves credit for trying to write a romance book that was deeper than it could have been, but I don't think at the end of the day that it succeeded. And I also don't think that I would be tempted to pick up another Colleen Hoover book. But it was an interesting experiment nonetheless, and I think that it's very interesting to read these best-selling books that I would not otherwise pick up to try to see if I can understand the hype around them. So far, I haven't, but we'll keep trying. So there you have it. That was my reading month experience for September. I hope that October will be better, and I hope that all of your reading experiences have gone better than mine has lately. But that is all I have for you guys this time. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!